Hey everyone, it's Gorelock here, and boy has this one been requested. I showed the fruits of my labor over the last week or so testing the mastery build for Prot Paladin and keys ranging all the way from 15 to about 23 over the last week, and it was a fantastic success. First, let me bring you guys on a quick journey of how this build came to be. About 3 or 4 months ago, so near the beginning of the tier when I was still progging on Azeroth, back on Alliance, I was very actively doing carries on Galley, Starlight, carries that paid gold as Prot Paladin. I did ret when I could, but it was way easier and faster to get in a group as a tank, because tanks were just in a much higher demand then. Back then, before the corruption vendor, I was one of the lucky ones who was up to their eyeballs in Twilight Devastation. So I ran that as Prot Paladin, like many others did for tank. For 15s, it was fine. There was nothing that really did damage, and you just did so much damage with the Twilight Dev, especially before it was nerfed. Since I was so far ahead of the world in gear, about, at that time, eye level 475 to 480, 15s were already a joke. You could do them half asleep. The problem with Prot Paladin is the second that I went up and tried to tank anything higher than, let's say, about an 18 or 19, it was an unbelievable struggle just not to die on every single pack. It was no longer about damage. It was just being able to do the key. So Prot Paladin, even at max gear with the standard Twilight Devastation build, it was so incredibly weak. Around this time, maybe 1 or 2 weeks later, Andy Brew came on the scene with the versatility build. And that started the versatility meta, as literally every single tank, regardless of your class, started copying it. I tried it on Prot, just like everyone else. And with my limited corruptions, I managed to get about 30 to 40% verse, which was pretty solid back then before the corruption vendor. What I found was I was definitely a bit tankier, but only marginally. The damage was also way, way lower. I went from doing 50 to 60k DPS in some keys all the way down to 30 or 40k. Which is unlike other classes, while like the warrior, for instance, they actually ended up doing even more damage with the versatility build. Ultimately, I was able to do the 18s and 19s a little easier, but I was still a Prot Pally. My HP still jumped all over the place, and doing 20 plus felt like a pipe dream as Prot. After talking to a bunch of the top world healers and tanks, including at that time the best Prot Paladin in the world, they all said the same thing. Prot Paladin isn't as viable as other tanks at the highest level because A, they were too squishy, B, their damage intake was far too unpredictable. Your HP just jumped all over the place. And here's C. The versatility build, it helped a little, but it only really hid the problem, more like a band-aid than anything else. It didn't really solve the core, because the core problem is that your HP jumps all over the place, you try and heal yourself to full, and then you're back down to 20% 2 seconds later. It was not good. And that makes it so healers, they just have to heal you the whole time. They can't really DPS because they don't know what's going to happen. So it was at this time that I was crafting the rep build you see today. Not the one from my first guide, not the one with Ineffable Truth, but the one that I wear currently, which is the full mastery one, with 7 masterfuls and 1 rank 3 hone mine. And it hit like a train. So while I was building that, I thought, you know what? Why can't I just build mastery on Prot? And so that started this whole train of, I started doing tons of research on soft caps and hard caps, how mastery on Prot Paladin actually worked, its relative scaling, everything. And my initial findings was that on paper, as a build, mastery Prot Paladin would be absolutely godly. However, there was a huge problem at this time, 2 to 3 months ago. The current amount of gear and mastery required to make it work was completely infeasible. It just was not possible, even with the best gear in the game. That is, until the corruption vendor came out. You see, once you hit a certain breakpoint, which was somewhere around the 3,500 to 4,000 mastery range, the build was not worth it. But after that point, the damage, the defense, the exponential scalability, it goes out of control. So this is how it works. So the Mastery Prot Paladin, like the name suggests, it is a build very, very similar to that of the Ret, where you stack an insane amount of mastery. We are talking mastery on every single piece of gear, every single socket, every single Azerite. The reason why you do this is because for Prot, mastery increases your attack power in a 1-to-1 ratio, your chance to block in a 1-to-1 ratio, and also reduces the damage you are taking when standing in your consecration, which by the way is a 100% uptime, in a 1-to-3 ratio. It's a triple threat. That means it's even stronger technically than it is for Ret. In plain terms, this meant that if you could achieve about 70% mastery baseline, once again, it's about that 4,000 number, you would have about 70% bonus attack power, a permanent 23% damage reduction, and about a 70% chance to block. Now, I'll talk about the talents later, but that 70% chance to block also includes magic attacks. That seemed pretty nice, but that alone is not enough. Now what if I told you you could have close to 100% uptime on the following: 140% bonus attack power, so you are literally doing 2.4 times damage at almost all times, 140% more block, which equates to about a 95 to 100% chance to block all attacks, once again, includes magic attacks, not just physical, and a compounding 50% active mitigation to all damage when your consecration is down, once again, 100% uptime, a 85% mitigation to all physical damage, because you have over 30,000 armor as Prot Paladin, and a 62% passive mitigation, because you're guaranteed to block every single attack that's thrown at you. Oh, and also perma wings. Why not? So all damage you do is 20% higher. All of your heals instantly heal you to full health. And because you're using a certain talent, those full heals are actually coming every about 5 or 6 seconds. So literally every 5 or 6 seconds, you can essentially lay on hands yourself. Kind of like a blood DK. Because why not, right? So the response I got after telling a few tanks these numbers is they said, like many would, it sounds insane. Now prove it. Because obviously, it sounds great on paper. And they were right. Just because it sounds great on paper does not mean it actually works. Well, I can confidently say now, it does work. And this is how. So for the Mastery Prot Paladin, you want to run the following talents. You want to run Holy Shield, Crusader's Judgment, Blinding Light, Blessing of Spell Warding, Final Stand, Consecrated Ground, and Righteous Protector. This is what they do. So in the Mastery Prot Paladin build, when you're sitting at about 69 to 70% mastery, which in this case is about 43 to 4,400, Holy Shield gives you an additional 15% chance to block, which brings you up to exactly 70% chance to block. Now, because you also go the Mastery build, it's increasing your attack power, which makes Holy Shield actually do a lot of damage when it blocks. And now remember, when the full build is going, you're going to have about 100% chance to block, which means every time you block, you're probably going to be dealing about 7 to 10,000 damage to every single attacker every time you block, which is going to be every time. That's why Holy Shield is so powerful. On top of that, like the skill says, you are able to block spells as well. Also, you can also block some dots, which makes it really strong in PvP too. Crusader Judgment gives you more more judgments. Your judgment can crit as high as over 100,000 when this full build is running, so it does an immense amount of damage. And it's the best choice in this row, just generally speaking. The 45 row, you can really choose what you want. I tend to go Blinding Light because it gives even more interrupts. Fist of Justice is also perfectly viable. You can get a lot of stuns out really quick, especially with this build, how many times you're using Judgment. Repentance is also viable, but most likely someone else in your group is going to have a better version of Repentance. In a 60 row, Retribution Aura, even with the Mastery build, does absolutely no damage, so it's not worth taking. So it's really between Cavalier and Blessing of Spell Warding, and that really depends on the type of dungeon and the affix you're running. If you're running something like last week that has Bursting Necrotic, that's something you could really say maybe for Necrotic, Blessing of Protection is worth. Otherwise, Blessing of Spell Warding does not drop aggro on mobs like Blessing of Protection, and it gives you a magic immunity. So it's really useful in certain keys like Shrine. So the keys that you needed, I suggest taking Blessing of Spell Warding. If you don't think you need it, you can also take Cavalier. In a 75 row, Final Stand is pretty much a must take. It is a Divine Shield taunt. It is immensely powerful. Probably one of the best talents in the game. In the 90 row, because your Consecration is so important and vital to this build, having it be 15% larger and having the movement slow effect in it is absolutely vital. Yes, you do not need this, and if you don't run this, I would suggest running Judgment of Light, because that will be a massive amount of healing. But I do suggest, in most circumstances, taking Consecrated Ground. This build does work for raiding, so in raiding, you can easily take Judgment of Light, and that will give you a massive HPS number, just from that one ability. Now, in the last row, both Last Defender and Righteous Protector are viable. To get the build completely working, I do suggest going Righteous Protector, because that is what gives you the really, really high uptime on Wings and the really low cooldown on Light of the Protector, which is your full heal. So I do suggest this. For certain keys, you might be able to get away with Last Defender, though. However, most keys I do suggest Righteous Protector. Now for the Azerite and Essences. So for the Azerite, you want to have triple Avenger's Might, as you see here. You want one Light's Decree. So your triple Avenger's Might gives you another 2,600 base mastery when you pop your wings. And because you're going a ridiculous amount of Masterful, that ends up giving you many, many, many thousands. And that's what gets you up to the really high amounts of mastery. Light's Decree, because you want to have maximum wings uptime, so getting that extra 5 seconds can really help. And then you go one Inspiring Vanguard to increase the chance of getting shield procs and more judgments, as well as a pretty much a permanent 1000 strength. And then lastly, you take one Soaring Shield, so that way you also have another 500 mastery at almost all times. For your essences, you want to run normally these. You want to have your Vision of Protection Major, again, for the uptime of wings. It also gives some versatility. You want Conflict and Strife, because that gives you a lot of versatility as well. Memory of Lucid Dreams allows you more Shield of the Righteous charges, which then allows you more wings uptime, and it also heals you, and it gives verse. It is definitely your best minor out of all of them. Now your last minor here, Spear of Suppression, that is the one you could play around with. I personally take Spear of Suppression because I wish I had a bit more haste, and this just gives 100% uptime on about 409 haste. It also slows enemies, so it's a really, really good trait for when you're tanking. There are other viable ones. Strength of the Warden is viable here. Aegis of the Deep is viable here. Nullification can be viable, but it's not as good as the other two. So you have a bit of flexibility here, but generally I found Spear of Suppression works the best. Because again, more haste, more uptime on wings, more shield procs, more uptime in wings. It's a repeating loop here. Now, lastly, for corruptions, as you can see down here, my current build, I go 6 rank 3 Masterfuls, which gives me about 72% more mastery from all sources, and 3 rank 1 Ineffable Truths, which gives me 90% additional cooldown when it procs. And again, my stats, I currently have about 25% crit and 21% haste on top of all the mastery. I also have a bit of leech and avoidance as well, which definitely helps out. Because we have so much crit, we also get about 32% chance to just not take any damage from melee attacks. Now, you might be wondering, how much damage does this do? The answer is a lot. So in the initial test, and I'll keep this open so you could see how high our mastery and block and everything goes. Let's also put on mastery food so you see the full amount. But we will get up to about 100% block. It's also worth noting that in real combat, when stuff is attacking us, we will actually be tankier, because that's part of how Prot Paladin works. So the second I pop my wings here, I go up to 134%, all the way up to 147%. And you can see we are sustaining almost 200,000 DPS, which will go down, but it will normally stay up somewhere around 100,000 for a while. So this build actually does an immense amount of damage, especially in burst. I believe we got all the way up to about 200,000. But you can very easily sustain 100,000 with a build like this. Additionally, you could see that our wings cooldown is coming back rather quickly. And that was even without an ineffable proc. But the second we get this ineffable proc, we're going to instantly get our wings back. We get wings again. We're back up to 149% mastery, which again is 52% damage taken reduced. Which you also saw is about 152% more damage done, which is how we're sustaining this 90 to 100,000 DPS over time. Every time we get an ineffable proc, when we slam our shield, it takes about 6 seconds off of our wings cooldown, and that's how we just have it again. So your general uptime on wings with a build like this, you're probably looking somewhere around 70 to 80% in a key, which means whenever you need it up, it'll be up. And you can see there that was about 100,000 crit on Judgment. So this build, it simply does a lot of damage. You'll never have problems with threat. And then in terms of taking damage, you're just blocking every single hit. So you're just really not taking any damage. Let's just show you what the uptimes look like. Just need to get out of combat. So if you take a look here, all of our damage came from mainly 4 skills. You get your Shield of the Righteous, your Avenger's Shield, Judgment, Consecration. Your Hammer of Righteous does a bit, because you have to add both of them. It does about 7%. However, what's missing here is nothing is attacking us. So we'd be getting Grand Crusader procs, which gives us another permanent 1,000 strength at all times, and then also Holy Shield is normally about 6 to 7% of your damage overall as well. So the damage you see here will actually be a good bit higher when you're in real combat. Additionally, on top of that, you can see that our uptime for wings was roughly about 72%. Our uptime on Shield of the Righteous was also about 82%. So that's the thing that's giving us a ridiculous amount of armor as well. All the uptimes are very, very high here in terms of both offensive and defensive. And as you saw earlier, our overall in most keys tends to be about 60 to 70,000. If you like this kind of content, make sure to like and subscribe for more.